sinners, and saints. Dust off those horns and halos. It's time for Alan After Dark.
Hey y'all, you know what? I have the worst case of swamp ass that I have had in years. It is so swampy, I swear to God, I hear the frogs croaking. But I'm not shitting you, I'm saying it's really bad. The ass crack, even the front, the balls, all of it. I swear I could be in the shower to cool off, soap it all up, and it won't be 25 minutes, and the ass is swampy again. I wonder if that's why people from other areas of the country and around the world think about the South in the summertime. How hot it is, the humidity, the stickiness, and wonder if we're miserable. You all know me. I will take this hot weather any day over winter. I hate winter. I just hate it. I just hate the cold weather. And that's a sign of getting old too, right? Sure. I guess there is, looking back to the past, there is a certain charm about Southern life and what it was like in the summertime when I was a kid. And I guess we'll take a trip back in time just to reminisce a little bit about life in the South during the summer and some of the old wives' tales and the old superstitions that kind of go along with it, you know? So let's do that. Let's take a trip back in time and talk about summer in the South. Growing up in the country areas away from the cities, it's a totally different experience. I know city kids here in the South didn't have the same type of lifestyle that we did. And that's understandable. It's just a different vibe. It's a different world, really, from where I grew up. It even is now. I've mentioned several times when I head back home to visit the folks that it's not just a distance in miles, but in decades. It just feels so backward there, so old-fashioned, for the lack of a better word or phrase. And I'm sure that people, when they think of the South, they think of movies like Deliverance or I Spit on Your Grave, or maybe shows like The Beverly Hillbillies or Green Acres, things like that. And there is some truth to those shows. There is some connection to reality with those shows. Not much, but there is some, so you can't really deny it. Not that they painted the best picture of Southerners. Of course, we don't really need any help when it comes to that. We have enough issues of our own to cause that. But the first thing that I can think of when the weather turned warm in the spring and summer is, as a kid, running around barefooted. You rarely wore shoes as a kid out in the country in the summertime. There was nothing like stepping out into the front yard and feeling the lush grass between your toes. There was just this amazing feeling. It was almost like walking on natural carpet. It was just exhilarating, but you had to be careful. You couldn't walk outside too early in the morning because of dew. But once the dew dried off, you could run around the yard all day long. And you toughened up your feet so you could run almost anywhere. The fear was of stepping on a hornet's nest or yellow jackets, a bee sting, or possibly a snake. But there was always that amazing feeling of just running around barefooted and having a good time with it. We all did it. All my cousins and I, everybody I knew did it. So much so that, there were rules. You couldn't go into a store. Well, some stores, they wouldn't allow you to go in barefooted for fear of you stepping on a broken glass or something and threatening to sue them. No, that was the thing even back, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. People threatening to sue for damages and so on and so forth. I think there's a saying now, that little sign, no shoes, no shirts, no service. It's a very common thing, though, in the South to be running around with no shoes on, and if you're a guy, not wearing a shirt when you're out and about. I seem to recall as a kid, though, I always wore a shirt. I don't recall just running around in a pair of shorts and that's it. So, and yes, cutoffs. jeans and things that were starting to tear or fray, your mom would cut off the leg parts and you'd create denim shorts. And it was a fun time. I mean, I wouldn't certainly do it now. And I know that my nephews and nieces, as kids, they don't run around barefooted like we did. So that's something that was an old part of our culture back then. But I can remember my brother had won a trip when he was in high school. It was an essay, and he had won the trip, and he got to go to Washington, D.C., and there were kids from virtually every state in the Union there. And he told us that there was a girl from a different state that approached their table, the Tennessee table, and she was being a little bitch. She said something to the effect of, "You're all from Tennessee, but you've got shoes on." And one of the girls at the table fired back at her and said, "Well, that's just the thing. They made us put shoes on at the state line." But that's a stereotype that I don't think really amounts to much. We all had shoes. It's just that it was more comfortable and cool to run around barefooted. There was just no need to have shoes on. Now, granted, when you took your bath, you had to do a lot of work on your feet because they'd be dirty at the end of the day, but that was part of the fun too. My grandfather, he had a regular job, but he also was a farmer, and all of his children inherited several acres of land that were part of that farm. And the part that my mother inherited, there was a creek that ran through the property. And my brother and I spent many a summer days playing in the creek, creating dams and enjoying just the water and stuff. And I doubt that kids do that now. I mean, thinking back on it, it was fun, but my God, we could have gotten any kind of an infection, in our feet. I would play with the water. I wouldn't get in the water necessarily. We wouldn't wade into that creek water, but it was fun to play, like making dams and creating your little boats that would race down the creek, especially if you had lots of rain. And when I say boats, I should really clarify that. We were poor, so a boat might be just a stick that I'd have a stick, my brother would have a stick, and we would race them along this creek and follow them down to a certain point, and we would have a winner. And sometimes we would try to make our own boats and maybe use a milk carton or something like that, something that had a waxy coating on it. But it was really a time that you had to use your imagination. It really was a fun activity. You're running back and forth, following your stick or your little boat down the water. And especially if we had lots of rain and the creek would rise, the water would be higher and faster. That could be an absolute adventure. And you really had to use your imagination, which was always a positive thing. And as I got a little bit older, like 10, 11, 12, 13, my parents had a lot of property and we had a lot of woods around our house. Using a rake, I made trails through the woods. And my brother and I, at one point, I'd made one so long that we rode our bikes on this trail, these windy, tough curved trails that I was just raking the leaves to the side and creating a basic path. And I would spend hours at a time doing it, just obsessed over it sometimes. And we did spend time with our cousins. We would run back and forth between each other's houses and play softball or kickball or even badminton or something like that. And we would play in the woods. You'd play things like cowboys and Indians and hide and seek, which would be amazing fun if you had lots of woods and a large area to play in. It was definitely an easier, more carefree time living out in the country that way, even though it was a struggle with poverty. But you didn't think about all the things you didn't have when you had so many things in nature to enjoy. And running around barefooted was great, unless you stepped on a nail and had to go get a shot. We call it tetanus now. Back then, we called it lockjaw. And that was a terrifying thing. So you were always worried about stepping on something, especially if you were barefooted, that could give you an infection that could kill you. And my mom, her youngest siblings, they were obviously older than I was. But when I was like 6 or 7, they were in their mid to upper teens at that time. So they were a little bit more older, and I can remember my uncle riding on horses with him, racing from my grandmother's house to the old family house where the barn was. And it was this long field from one area to the other. It's ironic that the old barn is long since gone, been torn down. But that's where my cousin lives, and my parents live across the road at the area where the barn was. And that was a long time ago. But there was always things to do. I mean, just to enjoy. And then on top of all that, virtually every day we would run down to the lake and go swimming. The lake that we swam in then was a lot less polluted than it is now. So I would be very hesitant to get in that water now. But it was just this way of life in the summer I don't think you could appreciate if you lived anywhere else. It was almost like you didn't have as many pressures. There were no cares in the world. Now, let me remind you too, though, for all the playtime we had, we still had to help in the gardens and help with digging taters and helping with corn and anything that was planted. You would see us kids out there in the fields helping to carry it back to the house, whatever it was. Tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, strawberries even. You name it. So you did have chores and lots of work to do. And I did, especially as I got into my high school years and I didn't have a summer job. My mom worked as well as my dad. And so basically I was the one at the house mowing the yard, cleaning the house, doing some laundry, making the beds, having supper on the table when they got home. I did all that. And of course, it felt like punishment back then. But honestly, it made me very independent as I grew up and got out on my own. I knew how to do virtually everything. And so it wasn't a big deal for me. Unlike the generations before me, the boys weren't shown those things. They were the man, damn it. I'll just tease my father. As brilliant as he is in his business, he has never done a load of laundry. I don't think he knows how to use the microwave even. But that's generational, and that stems from the Southern culture at the time. Summer nights, oh my God. You can hear the frogs and the crickets, and you can hear the whippoorwills, an orchestra of natural sounds, star-studded skies, and moonlit nights where we could play as late as we wanted to on certain nights. Of course, we had bedtime and we would have our moms yelling out for us to come back home. I have great memories of sitting on the front porch at twilight time, and the world really does seem to go to sleep other than the animals that are singing and hunting in the nighttime. But it really is a very different pace of life. Even now, when I'm visiting and I stay after dark, it is almost suffocating for a city boy like me now in an area where they don't have streetlights. And if the moon is not high up in the sky, it is very dark. It is inky black dark. And it can be a little bit suffocating. It can be intimidating for a guy who no longer experiences that. That's a big difference in city life and country life, is that we have so much light pollution, but that for me gives me a sense of security in a way. I like that there's light and you can see the streets are lit up and you have a less likely chance of being in an accident. Whereas in my hometown, at night especially, with no streetlights, animals that roam at night, you're at risk of running over a deer or any kind of animal. Skunks, possums can dart out. We have coyotes now where I was raised. They're much bigger canines than I would have ever imagined. I always kind of pictured them like the size of a fox, but they're not. No, they're very intimidating in their size. And I remember in the summertime, this will be a surprise to you maybe, but I remember that waking up Monday morning, it was my favorite time in the summertime. Why? Because it was the farthest time away from church at that point. That sounds awful, I know, to some of you, but I hated church. I really did. Even as a young kid, And it just felt great to wake up on a Monday morning knowing that I had a whole week to go before I had to go back to church. Because to me, it was worse than going to school. I just despised it. Go back and listen to some of the earlier episodes of Alan After Dark, and you'll hear a lot about some of the reasons why I didn't like church, and I don't to this day, and I bash religion constantly. One of the main reasons why I bash religion is because of the effect it had on people in my hometown. A pastor of a church had great influence on people, and they were known to instill fear in people. And that's where a lot of our superstitions and old wives' tales really stem from. You know, the fear of satanic cults, devil worshippers, as we call them. Those rumors flew almost every summer for years there in a row. But there were other things that may be exclusively attributable to Southern living, to Southern culture. Like, for example, getting warts. There was always talk that if you handled a frog or a toad, that you could get warts. Well, we know that that's not really true, but someone, I think it was my dad one time said, it's because they pee on you. If a frog or toad, you're handling a frog or a toad and it pees on your hand, you'll get warts. Seriously. And of course, the really old wives' tale about stray dogs and howling. If a stray dog howls and it's looking at you, that's a sign of your impending death. You're doomed. No truth to it, but it was a superstition that we had. I remember my mom was very upset one day. We had a hawk attack our chickens, and it caused a big commotion with all of our chickens. They were running wild and crazy. And one of our hens had chicks, and they got separated in the commotion. The hen was clucking a certain way to get her chicks' attention. Well, apparently the hen crowed like a rooster. My mother was so freaked out, she wanted it dead. It was some sort of bad sign. I don't know what it meant, but she was very bothered by it. The hen was not killed, but she never got over it. And she was wary of that hen from that point forward. I don't know if she thought it was some sort of like wicked possession or something or what, but true story. And I'm going to tell this one. And if she were to hear this, she would absolutely probably kill me. She'll be mortified, but I want to share it anyway. Remember now, this is how they were raised. They were raised with these superstitions, and it's just the culture. So I don't blame them for having them. I just wish that they had been a little more educated earlier to know that most of them are just legends. They're not real. Every once in a while, we would get locked out of the house. And one of the windows, we never locked it for whatever reason, I don't know why, but it would never open all the way, but just enough for a person my size or my brother's size to crawl through it. Well, every time we get locked out, at first, it was me. She'd make me go through the window to unlock the door, but I had to crawl back out the window and go in through the door. You couldn't just go in through the window and stay in. You had to crawl back through the same window out and come in because it was bad luck to go through one entrance and then not come out the same one. Yeah, I don't get it either, even then when I was doing it. But fortunately, I got a little too big, and the last couple of times it was my brother. And it wasn't easy to do, by the way. It was hard to bend in and get your legs in, and it would almost feel like your legs were going to break because you're kind of bending against your knees, you know. You're going down and your knees bend backwards, and it would hurt sometimes. And my brother almost cried that last time he did it. I remember that. There was a fascinating thing also that would fall, I guess, under superstition, but it actually seems to have worked. Now, it could be just blind luck, but I'm going to tell you the story anyway. In the country, you had what we called well water. You had companies that would drill for water wells. You would have water wells, if that makes sense. Like, you know, they drill for oil. Well, in the country, you did not have what we called city water. There wasn't water lines piping water to your houses back in the day. You had to have a well. You might wonder, well, how did you know where to drill for water? Well, my dad, he had this ability to locate water, and that was called witching a well. He would get called, and somebody would ask him to come over and witch a well for them. Yes, I'm saying witch, like a witch, like a witch. What this would entail is my dad would cut a Y shaped stick from a tree, but he would pick certain trees, and right now I can't remember which one specifically, whether it be an oak or maple or even a fruit type tree, a tree that grows fruit, but it was always a Y shape. That's about, I don't know, 12 inches or longer, I guess. And there was no other branches. It was pretty flat. It was just the Y shape of this stick. So you grab the Y end underhanded so that the heels of your hands are facing up to the sky, and you hold the main part of the rod horizontally so that it points in front of you. And when you're holding it, you walk slowly, and the stick will start bending toward the ground, and that's supposed to be where the water is. Superstitions, some say it's fake, but I can tell you this: my dad did it several times, and every time he did it, they found water. Now, maybe our area was just lucky with lots of underground water, but he was one they would call to come and witch a well. Well witching. He didn't have to cast a spell. He just walked the walk, and that stick would point down, and he would actually do it several different times at each location, though. He would go from a different angle and see if it still pointed the same way. And that's when he would say he was certain that they would find water at that location. Of course, there were never guarantees, but it was just one of the fascinating things that people did, and it seemed to work. I often wonder why ministers, pastors didn't point to that practice and claim that it was witchcraft. It's something that they didn't, I guess because there was a positive benefit from it. Water is critical for everyone, and every home needed water. And since you didn't have public water available through a utility, that was the only way. These days, they do have public water through a utility, and there are still wells out there, and there's some people who still use well water. I don't know how they get away with that now, because there is a tremendous risk of the water table being polluted, and you could be consuming water that could kill you. I have an aunt, I believe, that still uses water from her well rather than the public utility. It's her privilege, I suppose, but I certainly wouldn't drink it. You can bathe in it and stuff like that, but I wouldn't cook with it, or I wouldn't drink it, that's for sure. Maybe that's just me. I didn't know it at the time, but a great uncle of mine on my mother's side, he used to come and stay with us sometimes, and I've mentioned it before. He had a special nickname for me, and he called me Owl Grease and Gravy. Owl like Alan, but owl like the bird. Owl Grease and Gravy. I don't know where he got it from, but that's what he used to call me. Well, anyway, I didn't know it at the time. I know it now, but he was a moonshiner. He had a still out in the woods somewhere, and unfortunately, I think he drank as much of his own product as he sold. That's probably why he died. I'm pretty sure that's what killed him. Anyway, there are moonshine stills to this day in some of the most remote areas of Tennessee, and you don't mess with them. You better be really careful. You don't want to be wandering around in the woods and stumble upon a still, because you could get your ass killed. That's a fact. And people are very protective of their land, their property. I can remember one time I was on a business trip. I was going to visit a recycling facility in one of the most rural counties in the state. And it was just so funny because things like Google Maps and things like that, they just didn't work. It didn't work in an area so remote. And I just remember being on this amazingly beautifully paved road, winding through the hills in this beautiful lush green forest, and accidentally taking a wrong turn. The road went from like a 2-lane paved road to a smaller road that you'd have to slow down to let one car pass. Then it went from paved to gravel, and that's when I knew I was in trouble. I was trying to find a way to turn around when I come upon a fence that blocked the road with this painted sign with words painted in red that basically said that if I went any farther past that point, you'd be killed. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to go in reverse here and back up as far as I have to find a place to turn around. I'm not trying to say that all Southern people are like that, but there are areas that you don't mess with them, okay? I'm just saying. Get off my property, they mean it. But there is Southern hospitality in a lot of ways. There's also the racism, the bigotry, the ignorance. I can remember a person once, I was just like 18 working at this facility, a distribution center, and I remember a guy coming in wanting to apply for a job, and he couldn't read or write. So somebody filled out the application for him, but the job would require you to be able to read and write. Now, before people jump to conclusions, almost everyone here, even in the most rural of areas, can read and write. That's something that has changed over the decades since I was little. And even then, everybody in my family for generations back can read and write. Now, I think my great-great-grandmother, she may not have been able to read or write, but she made sure that all of her children could. Because no matter how country, rural type of person you are, I think everybody recognizes the importance of being able to read and write, literacy. But again, I believe that ministers, preachers took advantage of that. They wanted people who weren't educated so that they could manipulate them into believing things that, well, really, honestly, aren't true. Instilling that fear, exploiting superstitions and old wives' tales, using the Bible itself to frighten people into subservience. It all goes hand in hand. So I think a lot of people do view the South probably like the movie Deliverance or the Beverly Hillbillies, but it could also be considered similar to Steel Magnolias, fried green tomatoes. We're probably, when it comes to the way Hollywood views the South, take all those extremes and we're probably somewhere in the middle. At least sometimes. Shoo doggies, what an episode this has been. I hope you've had fun, you've enjoyed this episode, and you've been entertained and happy and full of love and joy and maybe craving some sweet tea. Hallelujah. And as always, take life by the balls and be real. We'll see you soon.